became aware of the funky drummer breakbeat in 1989 when Public Enemy released their single Fight the Power. And just the sonic impact of those drums coming out of the speakers was mind-blowing.
I don't know when I first heard the funky drummer drum beat, but what I do know is from the minute I heard it, it was everywhere. I heard it in hip-hop, I heard it in R&B, I heard it in pop. I'd be at a live show, I'd hear the drummers playing it and working out to it. It was all over the place.
I remember going to the barn where I practiced drums thinking, how do I get my drums to sound like that? This was really before the internet, and it was hard to find out information about these songs. I learned that it was Clyde Stubblefield on the drums. Later on, I learned there were some studio effects applied on that breakbeat section, but I really had no idea how to go about getting those drum sounds on my own. That is, until I moved to New York City and started working with producer Ken Lewis and his engineer Cooper Anderson. They were doing something called sample replays, which I had never heard of.
So I first started working on sample replays 3 weeks out of college. My very first one was Kanye West.
And they explained it. It was basically, we need to get the exact sound of some old record. And it was really my first time working with a producer who was saying, your drums have to sound exactly like this, and nothing else.
The process of making a sample replay can get a little tedious.
And the timetables were always, we need this immediately, if not sooner.
But the positive is that you get this new piece of audio that you can use for anything because you own the copyright for it.
One of the things I've learned over the years is that as complicated as this process is, it's not impossible and it's not magic.
One of the first things I learned at Berklee College of Music was how to do a sound-alike project, which led to sample replays.
Cooper and I decided to start a website teaching these techniques called Getting the Sound. There's definitely a process you can follow for breaking these old sounds apart into their little component pieces and then building your recreation from the ground up.
One of the things that happens is you'll be training your ear to surgically pull apart recordings and focus in on different elements of tiny pieces of audio.
It involves careful listening, a lot of shootouts between instruments and recording gear, understanding the history and capabilities of both the original equipment and your own.
So the closest I've found is the UAD Capital Chambers.
And tweaking a lot of variables. It can be a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun in the studio too. For a long time, I've been working on trying to figure out how to capture the feel and vibe of some of the drummers who would influence me. Obviously, Clyde Stubblefield, Al Jackson Jr., John Bonham, Steve Jordan, Ringo Starr. So I spent a lot of time learning how to play the drums like that. But when I really dove into session drumming, it was a whole new challenge of figuring out how do you translate the sound that's in your head or something you hear on a record into something that the microphones can pick up and then transfer to tape or into the computer.
So nowadays you can get all these sample libraries, they have them online, you can flip through sounds, but if you flip through 300 sounds and you haven't found it, what are you going to do? You have to replay it and you have to have these skills.
And that's where working with Ken and Cooper really opened my eyes to, right, here's a path to do that. One of the first things I learned in doing these sample recreations is just how insanely difficult they are.
When Dylan told me he and Cooper were going to recreate the funky drummer drum beat, I was like, wow, that's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, you can hear what the drums are doing.
As much as all they did was hang up a couple of mics and have a guy go and groove, recreating that using modern things so that you can get that sound is not as easy as just hanging up two mics and going and playing a groove.
First, you have to put a set of drums together that sound exactly like the recording. Tuned the same way, muffled the same way. Maybe those heads haven't existed in decades. Then, of course, you have to perform it exactly the same way as the original, matching a highly idiosyncratic feel of an iconic, legendary drummer. Then you have to pick the mics that are going to capture the sonics that you're trying to create. You have to get the room sounding right, so the room sounds like some studio that maybe hasn't existed in 40 years. Then the mics go into preamps, which have an effect on the sound. Finally, I send the raw drum tracks to the mix engineer, who has a huge job ahead of them.
And that could include EQ, compression, mixing. other effects. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. Sometimes I feel like a Foley artist, really, just trying to find sounds from everywhere. Maybe a Foley artist crossed with a DJ, because DJs are digging through the crates. I'm digging through sample libraries looking for sound.
When you get it right, it just sounds and feels like an old record, and that's a huge part of so many genres today. Cooper and I have been working on this process together since the early 2000s.
Projects like Rick Ross, Fabulous. Around that time I was working on the Fun record, We Are Young.
I've actually had to recreate the funky drummer break a few times myself in my own studio, most notably on the track Detroit vs. Everybody by Eminem.
It's so cool that the beat's about 50 years old, and it's not only relevant, it's more relevant today than it was when it first came out. People are still snatching a snare drum sound, a kick drum sound, something. The beat just still has it.
The great thing about all of these techniques is you can use them to create this one highly specific thing, and on the other side of it, you have this whole new set of skills that you can use for whatever it is you want to create in the studio.
Even if you're not actually replaying a sample, the sound design techniques will really help your production.
I can't wait to see what people do with this information. I mean, I would love to hear everyone's funky drummer breakbeats. I think it'll make the world a better and funkier place, and that's a good thing.